So a question was raised about the Module 1 retake. And essentially, there is no due date. So that's not the issue with access to the Module 1 assessment. So if you click into the Module 1 content in Blackboard, what you should see at the very top is the retake. Now, I did set up adaptive release. So we had a case where students were engaging the final attempt of the module assessment without reconciling their mistakes. And if you scored a flawless score and got even extra credit items correct, meaning you scored a 5.5 on your first attempt. You know, we have students that say, oh, I don't need to reconcile because I have a 5.0. Well, the highest score on a first attempt with additional credit items is a 5.5, which means there were still mistakes made, right? The reconciliation is down here. And if you don't reconcile and post something in the reconciliation, then the 1.8 retake doesn't work. And I did this in most of the other classes, and I did that in this class, and I meant to explain that previously. My regrets for not sharing that sooner. What I can do is open up the adaptive release option and remove it and say, okay, if you want to take it without reconciling your mistakes, you can. And wait a minute, it says the item is still hidden from students. That should not be the case. So
Yeah, so in my case, I actually did do the reconciliation, but it still isn't showing.
okay, at this point, this is one thing we need everybody to do before our Wednesday break. So on Wednesday, we shared with the students that were on screen first that Wednesday is a holiday. And so classes are canceled at the university. We will not have class on Wednesday. But this is something that you can do and should do just to mop up now that you've had a chance to reconcile. And again, my regrets for some gaps in communication. So any questions on the expectation for logging your final attempt of the Module 1 assessment?
No, no
Professor
question.
Kentop, I have a question. It's actually very similar to the situation that you talked about. If I recall correctly, now I may be wrong about this, but I think I scored a 5.5. So then what do I do for the reconciliation?
You just post a note that says, I logged max score on the assessment.
Okay, awesome.
That's all you do.
All right. Thank you so much.
You know, I think what I'm going to do is double check to make sure everything on the assessment items is in place here. So right after class, I'm going to take another look at this. So I think what I'll do is make that unavailable. I thought I had everything in place. I just want to double check it. I'd hate to have another misfire. So let me go ahead and send a notice that it's ready for engagement as soon as I check all the items. We won't do that right now. We'll take care of that right after class. I do need you to make your final attempt of the Module 1 assessment before we start our class on Friday. What I'd like to do now is stop sharing, and Jadel, are you ready to share some fresh detail about what you've discovered in your case?
I will need about 1 to 2 minutes because I'm actually like in transit to get to a like stable area because I was in my car and the Wi-Fi was not great there. So I'm actually moving to a more stable place.
Okay. All right. Here's what we're going to do in the meantime. Can everyone see the screen? Can everyone see the screen?
We're still looking at Blackboard. I think you're looking at module 2.
Yeah, the learning
Yep.
outcomes. Okay, so to date, for our learning outcomes in module 2, I believe we did have a review and a discussion about how investigations, even in the incident handling context, may quickly or unexpectedly lead to a legal interest, right? It could be litigation, there could be lawsuit interests, or it could be that a law has been broken. And so even in the incident handling context, it's a prudent habit to hash artifacts that are collected even in the incident handling interest. Is that an accurate statement, and does that ring a bell, or do most of you recollect that that review in our class?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Now, when we're talking about salient interests depicted in chapter 3 with the lead scenario, when you read chapter 3 of the textbook, it talks about how a malicious agent is working in the network environment and working alternate hours, but also working other hosts. The idea that some of the artifacts you're looking for may not necessarily involve the host itself, right? So you have this concept of a pivot point. If a network adversary, if an adversary is on your internal network, they could be working on other systems and on other devices and doing some of the things they need to do from other hosts in order to avoid detection. So it's also true that in the case where you have a kernel level exploit, you may not be able to detect on the system itself that's infected that something is wrong. So if you go to the task manager and you notice that the CPU cycles, it's a low percentage, and your network output is relatively low, and yet on the network equipment, the log shows there's a huge, outbound traffic, outbound flow of data from a system, and it's not reflected in the task manager. So you go to task manager and you look at performance and you select network. So you're looking at network, and the upstream traffic isn't that large, right? The send traffic isn't that large. And yet on the router in the logs, it's showing, many megabytes of traffic outbound, right? So one of the things that we discussed and reviewed so far is this idea that other hosts and devices are of interest. So even though we're collecting host side artifacts, right? Client side activity, client side artifacts. The focus is not just a given individual machine, that you have to look beyond that. You have to look to other devices and systems to see whether or not there's related activity or suspicious activity And that's part of the interest in incident handling, because adversaries will work very aggressively and diligently to avoid detection. And one of the ways they do that is to operate from other systems. So they'll pivot, or they'll control a system that they use as a pivot point to gain unauthorized access to other systems, right? Does any of that ring a bell or sound familiar?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. This is one thing we haven't had a chance to review. And this related one, describe the Achilles heel and most underutilized features of network firewalls. So what I'd like to do is take a little bit of time to walk through the history of firewalls. And there's actually a history of firewalls that isn't very well articulated. If you basically do a search for the evolution of firewalls, this is a rising star in the firewall market space. Palo Alto Networks is a competitor with Cisco and HP and other network equipment providers. And so for most technology professionals, when they think about firewalls, the most basic firewall of all is a firewall that filters packets, right? So it filters packets. And oftentimes we think of packets in an IP context, right? And so because the term packet, right? If we're dealing with layer 2, the proper term is frame as opposed to packet. Does everybody understand that distinction from module 1? On layer 2, we're dealing with the local area network, and we're dealing with the MAC address, and we're dealing with frames, the encapsulation, or the defined data unit is called a frame, not a packet. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, I recall talking about that.
Okay. Well, in its most basic form, a packet typically has an IP address and a port, okay? Because when you're working, the majority of the traffic that's flowing on the internet, if you're dealing with a packet, that's layer 3, and if you're dealing with typical networks where internetworking is happening, right? Layer 3 means there's internetworking that's occurring. So there's a lot of things that are implied by the term packet. If we're dealing with frames, we're talking about the local hardware on the wire or on the Wi-Fi, and we're dealing with frames and a machine address, a media access control address, or a MAC address that's unique for the hardware interface that's connected to that network. But the moment you say packet, you're on layer 3. The moment you say layer 3, we're dealing with routes. And one of the things that we want to understand here is that routes are a big deal. So layer 3, whoa, what is that? Layer 3 means routes. And what's the most common piece of network equipment that you can think of that deals with that particular term?
The router.
It's the router, it's not the firewall. That's right. So it's a router that is the primary interest. That's important to understand. And at its most basic level, one of the things that happens today in the present is that people have forgotten about the importance of the basic router. So you can say all you want about advancements in firewall technology, okay? And there's certainly been many iterations or generations of evolution with firewalls, right? And we're going to basically map those out at the most basic level. But here's the part that most network professionals simply don't focus on. And this is bad because no matter how current or advanced your firewall is, if you don't take care of the original filtering that occurred long time ago in a galaxy far, far away before they had a firewall, on layer 3, you're dealing with a router. And routers use ACLs, access control lists. Access control lists, when properly implemented, can eliminate a majority of bad traffic, right? A majority of problem traffic. Even before that hits the firewall, okay? So a firewall is a specialized device and it's a security specific device. But the thing that kills me is that everybody's thinking about, in cybersecurity, everybody's thinking about the firewall as the primary filtering device. And certainly firewalls are designed for that, you know? The primary function is filtering. Is filtering. But routing comes first. And that's the part that most people just don't get. And you're not going to see this in the textbook. You're not going to see it. Well, you're not going to see that as something that's played up all that much. And that's because it isn't sexy. Okay, we go to cybersecurity conferences, we learn about the NGFW. Does anybody know what NGF means? Next generation firewall, right? So whenever you see NG, that's next generation firewall. And that's the latest, greatest, most powerful device that's going to save the planet and keep you from having problems. And that's wrong. That's absolutely wrong. And what's happened is that next generation firewalls have incorporated multiple functions so that they become a device that's known as a unified threat management. So what am I doing here? I'm bracketing. I'm starting with the world's first firewall in conceptual terms. It wasn't a firewall that was intentionally designed and explicitly designed with multiple ports to serve as a kind of a roach motel of bad packets, right? So the packets come in, but they don't go out, kind of thing. Before we had purpose-built firewalls, we had routers, and routers have always had something called access control lists. And too many times a service provider gives you a router and nobody looks at this. And if you have a service router and it's an enterprise grade service router, not just any router, or a current model of a consumer grade router, the odds are pretty good that there's still a feature in there called access control lists. And what you want to do is tell the router that when packets have this range of addresses, accept them. And when packets don't, if they aren't coming from this source, drop them. So this is source. When we talk about this, an ACL focuses on the source address. Not the ports. If it's set up right, your ACL has a simple rule that says, hey, I'm connected to XYZ network, the internet service provider's network, right? And if I get packets that are coming from anywhere other than the internet service provider, I'm not accepting them, right? So now that's an oversimplification, but basically you're going to define how packets are handled when they get to the router first, and that's the first piece of equipment. The router is still the first piece of equipment that connects you to the internet. And there's a security function in there that's just it's just underutilized. And that's not the most underutilized feature of a firewall. That's the most underutilized feature of a router. So we have a separate, I want to call this out. We have a separate student learning objective that where you need to speak to the most underutilized features of network firewalls. We're not talking about that right now because we're still talking about a router, the lowly router, okay? So at the very beginning of history, the first device that was capable of filtering packets proper, meaning, okay, a packet is layer 3, layer 3 involves routing. What's the primary piece of equipment? It's a router. And this is where Cisco really has its legacy, right? So Cisco has created very robust, very bulletproof, very high performance routers that use ACLs. And so you can basically dump a lot of the traffic that could afflict your network simply by identifying, okay, where's the source? Where's this packet coming from? Oh, hell no. And believe it or not, there's all sorts of packets that try to blitz right past the router, okay? And so this is one security device that is a precursor to and related to the origins of a firewall, but it's still important, and right now it's underutilized, and I want everybody to understand that, okay? So if you have a security challenged network, the first question you ought to ask is, okay, where's the router and how is that connected to the internet, and do I have ACLs set up? And you do that before you talk about firewalls. But in concept, anytime you have something that is identifying a criteria on a packet and it says, not this packet, that's a filter. So it's the one feature on a router that enables a filtering capacity, but it's so basic that people don't even consider it to be a router. I mean, a firewall. And what's sad is if 60% of the nasty traffic is dropped before it ever gets to your actual firewall, wouldn't you consider that an advantage? right? I mean, just think about it conceptually. Now, everybody understands what we mean about how the router is the first thing that connects you to the internet, right? Most of you are aware that consumer routers are actually all-in-one devices. There's a routing function, there's also a firewall function, right? Everybody knows that. There's a Wi-Fi radio, so it also provides, you know, local area network connectivity with Ethernet and with Wi-Fi. So what happens is that most people aren't aware in an enterprise setting, there's actually a dedicated machine and it has two ports. It's very simple. There's a port in and a port out, and that's it. And that's what a router is. And it's going to basically identify, okay, this packet goes out because we don't have any local area network packets outbound that we can give this to, so I have to pass it out or I have to pass it in. So a router, it is actually and conceptually the very first concept of a firewall that came to be. Okay. Now, if you look at a router and then you look at a firewall, one of the things that you start to realize is that a basic firewall, right? So you usually have more than one network in mind. So it's the local network. What's that network that's closer to the internet, but it's not the public network? Anyone? We've talked about this before, didn't we? Didn't we have some basic orientation on defense in depth? The term DMZ applies. Does everybody understand what I mean by DMZ? What does that acronym literally stand for? Can somebody unmute their microphone so we're sure? Hello?
Dematerialized zones?
Demilitarized zone. Yeah, that's close. So it's a local network, the public network, and a screened network that is public facing on a DMZ. A screened network is populated with bastion hosts. Did we talk about this already? We're talking about web servers, email servers, DNS servers, okay? So that's what we're talking about. Now, these are stateless, okay? They were stateless firewalls. So the first generation filters, they had more than one network in mind, but they were stateless filters. So that's the thing. Meaning They did not consider context. And I want you to understand that when we say context, we're really talking about ports. Which port is used for DNS? Does anybody know? In IP networking, there are two actually. TCP port what for DNS? Come on, this is review. You should know it. Someone, please.
Was it 53?
It's 53. That's correct. It is 53. Okay. And it's also UDP port 53. Okay. So what kind of packet should we be getting when something arrives on port 53? Okay. If it's a stateful firewall, the next advance in firewalls included stateful operation. If you get a packet and it's on port 53, should that be an email packet or a web packet? What kind of packet would you expect on port 53? What does it mean if you're getting web packets or email packets on TCP or UDP port 53? Does that sound right? Are you supposed to be getting email or web on port 53? No, you're not.
That doesn't sound correct.
Yeah, the packet, if it isn't what kind of packet? A DNS packet. If the information in that packet isn't DNS, then you have an issue, right? Now, next gen firewalls are specific to a given application or integrated solution, right? Well, let's just leave it at application. A spam firewall, right? So it's email centric with extra rules. Next gen firewalls, that's what we're talking about. So the first next gen firewalls, NGFWs, that's what we're talking about. Now, lately, the latest next gen are unified threat management, which is multiple application filtering. Now, this is a problem. And this is huge. And this is, I'm going to say problem in red. What happens if you start to put multiple security functions on one device? What does an attacker have to do to work around you? How many systems do they have to take down? Do they have to take down your router and a stateful firewall and then a spam filter? Or if you're running a single UTM, what have you just done?
Basically, they only have one target now.
Yeah, you've created one target. You've put all your eggs in one basket. You've just undermined the whole concept of defense in depth. UTM conceptually is great if you're lazy. And I would tell you that. I would tell people who offer UTMs that they're full of it. But it's a marketing thing. They want to beat the competition. So instead of just giving you a spam-filled firewall that only handles email, they also want you to buy their product because it's a reverse web proxy, which means that it's going to provide an extra layer of security for your web applications and your database backends. So basically what they're doing is they're taking two specialized next-gen firewalls and they're folding them together and saying, hey, buy ours because, well, you only have to buy one and it's cheaper. And all the chief financial officers in the audience go, what? Yay, we can save money. And all of the cybersecurity experts are going, boo. Why would I want to put all my eggs in one basket? So all the hacker has to do is figure out where's the UTM, let's take it down. Now I've lost my defense in depth, right? That's one of the problems with a one size fits all. Buy this advanced system. It's high performance, it slices, it dices. It protects your web applications, it protects your email. It actually looks for malware. No. And it provides secure remote access. So it does VPNs. It does everything. The whole point of unified threat management by providing a single system is to save chief financial officers money, but it's not to honor the interest of the true cybersecurity professional who's working in a dynamic environment who needs layered defenses. Boo! And this is the problem. You go to Cisco, you go to Palo Alto Networks, you go to HP, you go to Alcatel, you go to, I mean, just pick Siemens, pick any big company, right? And what you're going to find is that as soon as people are drinking the UTM Kool-Aid, this is where we take a step back in terms of defense in depth. It's a bad idea. And the fact that they're marketing a better, more cost-effective system is not always in your best interest. What am I saying? If you take dedicated special purpose next-gen firewalls that are designed exclusively for email spam and for reverse proxy and for intrusion detection and for malware detection, right? Client health. So you're setting up client side host IDS or HIDS, right? You have all of these really fancy terms. You have encrypted tunneling so people can securely access your business network from the home. This is all going through one device. I don't give a hoot who you are. I don't like it. And I'll go to any conference anywhere on the planet and swear on a stack of Bibles. It's a dumb idea. And you're pandering. You're basically, it's almost like you're pimping yourself out to the money people who care more about the money than about really securing your stuff. So this is where we make a left turn and then jump off the cliff. And I am not a fan of any next-gen firewall where unified threat management is considered to be the latest, greatest. Oh, it's the evolution, and this is the epitome of evolution. What a bunch of malarkey. It's nonsense. And I don't want you to drink the Kool-Aid. If they tell you that they have a next generation firewall that does everything, it slices, it dices, it's just one machine and it's so cost effective, I want you to ask the question over and over and over again. Like has anyone ever heard of the Emperor Has No Clothes? The old children's story about the emperor that has no clothes? This is literally the Emperor Has No Clothes. What we need are honest children on the sides of parades looking at a naked emperor going, why doesn't the emperor have clothes? Because everybody's been conned into believing that if you put all your stuff into one device, that's a good idea. It's not. We want to make hackers work for their money, work so hard for their money, they give it up. They don't want to mess with you anymore because you have so many layers of defense and there are so many hurdles to go through. They don't want to waste time with you and they decide to pick on someone else. That's the goal. Does everybody understand what I'm saying here?
Yeah, I
And-
understand.
And don't you think for a minute that machine learning and AI makes any difference? It doesn't make one blink of a difference. Now, they will claim on a stack of Bibles that I'm full of it and I can't prove it. And I'm like, okay, so you have intelligent code and there's machine learning and there's behavioral algorithms that identify unusual traffic or unusual patterns. Like a hacker couldn't create an unusual pattern of network traffic on purpose so that your own device chokes you. It's already been done. And it's embarrassing, right? The fact that AI is in it, that's just marketing stuff. That's, oh, it's artificially intelligent. Is it artificially intelligent to put everything in a single vehicle? Do you think it's physically, folks, do you think it's physically possible for any automotive manufacturer to design an automobile that can haul what a dump truck can haul and it'll get 60 miles to the gallon of gas? Does that even make any sense at all?
No.
Can you take a dump truck and turn it into a minivan where it holds 12 passengers comfortably and they can all do their own? No, you can't. The whole point is that there are some things that are purpose designed and built for the very reason that they exist. This is just one thing that I mean, I don't mean to preach, but it's evil. It's an industry trend. And if people had integrity, more integrity, they would speak out and they would say, enough of this already. We don't want this. It saves money and you can save money all the way to the poorhouse. This is a bad idea. Okay. So which next generation firewall do you want to own? Not the latest one that are UTMs. You want next gen firewalls that are purpose built for a given application. That's what you want. And you want to have more than one of them for redundancy, and you want to put them in different places. And when it comes to the Achilles heel, one of the most underutilized features of network firewalls, the other part about a network firewall that is really killer, they still haven't resolved yet. They still haven't solved this problem. And you're not going to see this in the, and by the way, I'm a fan of Palo Alto products, and I think they're giving Cisco a run, the industry leader and legacy industry champion, right? Palo Alto is really earning their chops. They have great products, and they're, from what I understand from people who are working with them, the performance metrics are off the charts. So they're really doing an amazing job of making life in network security more interesting and more cost effective, and they deserve a lot of credit for saying that. But that said, one of the things that kills me is that if you have a single user, who opens up a link on an email message, the outbound traffic that the user requested will still not be stopped, right? You can spend millions of dollars on the latest, highest tech stuff, and all it takes is an uneducated user that opens up a tainted link. And as soon as that happens, because the inside requested that connection, the firewall says, oh, this is somebody in operations that wants to go to this website. Okay. And they basically allow the connection because it's requested from inside versus outside. the most underutilized feature of a firewall is the outbound rules. What am I saying? When you look at every firewall, everybody focuses on the inbound rules, because if somebody clicks on a link or executes software that opens a port and goes out on the network, the system assumes that the user wants to do that. And the firewall and the OS say, okay, you have a green light, and out you go onto the internet connecting to something nasty, because it assumes the user is intelligent enough not to do something stupid. The problem is users are always clicking on stuff that isn't always the best thing, because they're rushed, because they're overworked, they're multitasked past a point. The Achilles heel and most underutilized feature of most network firewalls are the outbound rules and what they should block. Or you should have more than one set of firewalls. You should have a firewall at the front of your local network and a firewall sitting out by the DMZ, and then another. You should have layers of firewalls. And more to the point, you should turn on the outbound traffic rules. So if there are certain things that go out, like port 666, hello. Did you know that unless there's an outbound rule to block a connection to 666, a user in your shop on your network that clicks a link that takes you to 666, that's the most obvious ticking time bomb there is, or ever was, right? What do most firewalls do? They allow the connection, unless they're purpose built to catch something like that, and they have lots of outbound rules, right? Not a UTM either. Okay. Jadel. Would you be ready to show and share on Friday, considering that Wednesday we're off and classes are, the university is closed on Wednesday?
Hello?
Hello, Jadel?
Yes.
Okay, you would be ready to show and share on Friday?
Indeed.
Okay, I
I
will
have
put out
everything
draft.
set up right now, actually.
Say again?
I have everything set up right now, actually.
I know. The problem is that we're running right into another class. So.
Right.
Okay,
Got it.
so on Friday, we'll go ahead and be ready to start on Friday at 9 o'clock, ready to go.
Bet, got it.
The other thing we'd like to do, I'll finish putting out the draft of our study guide, and I may have the assessment for module 2 out there. Okay. And also look for the notice for the final version of the module 1, so you can complete your final attempt of the assessment for module 1. Thanks for joining us today. And if you haven't finished the assignments and the solution, please go ahead and finish that up, because we'll be posting scores for that from now until Friday. Take care. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.